Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Pause for Self Care podcast. Today, I'd like to chat a little bit about trauma and, how it affects us, where it comes from. Trauma is a response to an intensely stressful event or situation, and that is what every psychological page will tell you if you contact Dr. Google. So, Dr. Google says it's a response to an intensely stressful event or situation. The effects of trauma can be long-lasting, but of course, healing is possible. And that's why you're here, aren't you? Traumatic events can happen at any age. So, from children to the elderly, no one is exempt from experiencing trauma. And we all heal very differently. How do we heal? We heal differently because of the way we were brought up, because of our expectations of life, because of the experience that caused the trauma. It's all different. But as corny as the saying is, we're all in the same boat. You can find help for trauma. Seeing a therapist is extremely valuable, but also finding a support group. Having that knowledge that you are not alone gives you space to heal and to grow, and just to know that you have some kind of safety net to fall back into, where somebody will say to you, hey, look, today was a bad day. That's okay. Tomorrow could be better. We all have bad days in our healing. Healing is not linear. It's more of a scribbled up roller coaster. And that's okay too. Some of us are more resilient than others. Gosh, I hate that word sometimes. I hate being resilient. We will need to be more empathic to each other. And that's where Pause for Self-Care comes in. If you don't have somebody around you who's empathic, you can always be empathic towards yourself. Okay, so trauma. Yeah, many people share symptoms of post-traumatic stress like anxiety, flashbacks, and sleep disruption. And they aren't fun. That's why I say it's really nice to have that support and having treatment for your therapy, so you can understand why your body is doing what it is doing. It can help you have an improved quality of life once you have looked into all those whys and hows. So trauma refers to your response to an event that happened, a traumatic event that happened. It overwhelms you, and afterwards you possibly shocked. You in denial that it actually happened. Your body reacts to the trauma. Sometimes you get sick. You have this horrible flu and you just wonder where the hell it came from. Your mind struggles. And your behavior changes. Trauma is an event or experience as harmful or life-threatening. It has lasting effects on your mental, physical, and emotional health. Your social and spiritual well-being too. Trauma is typically associated with events such as physical or sexual assault, violence, or accidents. And it can involve responses to repeated events like ongoing emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, childhood neglect. Now, not everyone who has experienced a traumatic event will have long-lasting effects. Some will develop PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and many others might still have symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Then we have complex trauma. Trauma that repeatedly occurs over time has a cumulative effect. This is known as complex trauma, and it's often associated with childhood trauma, especially children who have experienced a narcissistic parent, experienced abuse as a child. It leaves a really deep imprint on your worldview and your sense of self and your relationships later in life. And that's not just with intimate partners, that's with friendships, bosses, people on the street. It's honestly with every part of your life has been affected. Trauma can affect many areas of your life. As I said, your emotional, social, and physical well-being. During extreme stress, the body and mind become overwhelmed, and this is where your body decides how it's going to act. Is it going to fight what trauma is there? Run away? Completely freeze? This is how our brain reacts to trauma. From personal experience, nightmares can still happen 20 years after the fact. That's why ongoing healing, ongoing self-care, and knowing when to contact a therapist or a counselor is exceptionally important. Symptoms of trauma include intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares, avoiding things that remind you of that trauma, the road your accident was on, the area where you lived, where that childhood abuse occurred. Being hyper vigilant of danger. Being easily startled. And then there's triggers. Triggers, here. So many things can trigger you after trauma. For instance, if you've been in an accident or you've had childhood trauma where fighting occurred, bangs can be a trigger. A loud bang, something falling off a shelf, can be a trigger. And it can turn you into a blubbering mess. And you'll say to yourself, why? Why did that give me such a fright 20 years down the line, and here I am, a blubbering mess? It's because your mind holds those memories. Your body holds those memories, and it keeps it within yourself. So you need to give yourself space and grace to find that healing and to know that triggered me. That's why it triggered me. But I'm okay. You've got to keep reminding yourself that you're okay. You have to keep reminding yourself that you are not the bad one. You have to work through guilt, through shame, work through those triggers. You need to find a way of being able to cope with life so that you can grow and that you can have a positive impact on the world. Like I said in my introduction, you are the leading character in your own story. And don't you want your life to be fabulous? I'd love it if you head over to my blog where I'll put up an article with all this information about trauma and how it affects you. I'll also be speaking about panic attacks because those come along with trauma. When you've experienced trauma, your body reacts and you have pain. Like I said, you can get the flu after trauma and think, where the hell did this flu come from? Meantime, it's just the trauma working its way through your body. That happens with grief too. And when we experience a trauma, we have to actually work through grief too, because we grieve a part of ourselves that can no longer exist because that trauma has changed us and impacted our lives to such an extent that we are no longer the same person. So the stages of grief are completely in play here. And we need to understand that with trauma. Trauma is less about the event and more about how you responded to the event, how your body responded, how your mind responded. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network reports that the following events can actually lead to trauma: medical, sexual, family, refugee, traumatic grief, terrorism, violence, intimate partner violence, disaster trauma, and childhood neglect. Emotional trauma is where traumatic events leave us with feelings. These feelings leave us feeling unsafe in our body. Emotional trauma can alter how our brain reacts. And it can leave you feeling hopeless, even depressed. Complex trauma is a series of traumatic events that has a lasting impact. For example, childhood neglect and trauma. Secondary trauma. also known as vicarious trauma. Secondary trauma refers to being a witness to a trauma. Witnessing a traumatic event can impact your emotional health, and you are just as deserving of support, empathy, and compassion as those who experienced the trauma themselves. That's why it is so important to be speaking about trauma. It's not this woke description. Oh no, we need to be more woke. We need to care more. We need more safe spaces. We just need empathy for each other. As the world has progressed, so has violence. And we all see it, from children to the elderly. We are all affected by it. So to be a little bit kinder is not a lot to ask. Every single emotional wound deserves empathy. We all deserve validation. So right now, if you've listened to this podcast, I'd like to say to you to share your story, whether it's privately in your journal, to a therapist, to a counselor, even if you're brave enough and you share it below in the comments. It's your starting point of healing right now. Don't feel ashamed. Please don't feel ashamed. You deserve support. You deserve care. As a South African depression and anxiety group support group leader, I would like to say to you at this point, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group has toll-free lines, and you can call at any time to a counselor to find assistance. They can direct you as to where to go, where to find a therapist that can help you with self-care tools, maybe a nice breathing technique that could help you through a panic attack. The main thing is that you know that you are absolutely worth that assistance. You deserve that validation and you deserve support. You are not weak for wanting help. You are by far stronger than anybody who has called you weak. Because healing is not easy. But with support, you can get through it. And this little podcast, I want you to remember every single time you listen to it, you're worthy of support. And that is where I will end today's podcast on trauma. If you'd like to know a little bit more about trauma, head over to the Pause for Self-Care blog, which will be up on my socials. As I said, Pause for Self-Care. That is all you need to look for. I will also add the toll-free lines for SADAG on my page every now and again, so do look out for those, and I hope that you have a trauma-informed day. Now that you're a little bit more informed about trauma. Thank you so much for listening, and hit the subscribe button, why don't you? Thank you. Until next time.